From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Steve Winnick, and I am the writer and editor here in the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. And I'm here to welcome you to the latest in our Homegrown Concert Series. And the Homegrown Concert Series was created to showcase the best of music and dance that is homegrown in communities across the United States. And this is kind of an unusual concert in the series because usually we hold them at noon in the Coolidge Auditorium, and we work with state folk arts coordinators to help us program the series. And this is a little bit different. It's an evening concert, of course, and it's a very special presentation, a multimedia event with Jeff and Garrett Warner, and it's a program that's called From the Mountains to the Sea, the Anne and Frank Warner Collection. The Anne and Frank Warner Collection is one of the great treasures of the American Folklife Center archive. We're really very pleased to have this collection. And it's got beautiful recordings of all kinds. The ones that are probably the most famous are the ones from North Carolina, including the recording of Frank Proffitt singing Tom Dooley, which became a gigantic hit for the Kingston Trio in the 1950s, and they will talk about that in the presentation. I should do some housekeeping. I should say that one of the reasons that we're able to hold this evening concert is co-sponsorship by the Folklore Society of Greater Washington, which is also known as FSGW. FSGW is a membership organization dedicated to preserving and presenting folk arts in the Washington, D.C. region, and you can find out more about them on the table outside. And you can also find recordings of the artists at the table outside. And we're going to ask you, if you want to buy those recordings and books and other things from the artists, please do so at the intermission, because we do have to clear the building pretty quickly after the concert. So we'd like to make sure that there's time to get everybody out. So please try to do your purchasing at the intermission, and we really hope that you will want to take some of this music home with you. One more piece of housekeeping. We love mobile phones. We really do. In fact, the Veterans History Project even has an app that you can use your mobile phone to record oral histories. But we would like you to turn your mobile phones off during the concert because this is all being documented for a webcast. And so there's a film crew here, and it's being documented on audio as well, and we don't want our phones to ring. So please turn off your cell phones. And so I mentioned that this is a wonderful presentation called From the Mountains to the Sea about the Anne and Frank Warner Collection. And we are here to welcome Jeff and Garrett Warner. And they are going to join me on stage for just a moment with a magical object before they begin the music and the presentation. And so, Jeff Warner, Garrett Warner, and I'm going to invite up on the stage as well Betsy Peterson. She is the director of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to everyone here. I'm up here to accept a wonderful gift from Jeff and Garrett Warner. They're going to give something to the American Folklife Center archive, and so I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about this beautiful instrument.
This was made by Nathan Hicks, who was a mountain man in Watauga County. You're seeing his picture as we speak. It was made for Frank Warner in 1939, and it has, my father was doing a program in New York City singing songs of the Hudson River, and he took this brand new banjo that he had with him and found himself sitting right next to the poet Carl Sandburg. And on a whim, he said to Carl, "Would you sign the head?" Carl Sandburg signed the head, dated it 1939. And my father said, after that, it was easy to get other people to sign it.
So there are 265 signatures that were added beyond that, including Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Alan and John Lomax, and many
Leadbelly.
others.
Yeah, it's great. And we had a wonderful time talking about it with Steve today. So much so that my brother and I said, you know, we really love this banjo. Maybe we should keep it.
Yeah.
No.
It looks even more attractive now.
But no, we decided in our wisdom, this goes to the Library of Congress, and we're happy that it goes to the American people with all the names from the folk revival and folk academe from 1939 to 1977.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful gift. And to have a beautiful banjo made by Nathan Hicks, played by your father, Frank Warner, and on behalf of the Library of Congress, and I know everyone at the American Folklife Center, I'm pleased to accept this. We will cherish it, take good care of it, and I want to thank Jeff and Garrett Warner for this beautiful instrument, and also want to thank Ann and Frank Warner for their amazing collection, which they have bestowed to the American people and given to us to take care of it, and we will do our very, very best. Please come and see it. But now I'm going to turn everything over to Jeff and Garrett Warner for From the Mountains to the Sea, the Ann and Frank Warner collection. So please enjoy.
Thank you, Betsy.
They say there is a land where the crystal waters flow, or beds of ore of purest gold, way out in Idaho. Away, Idaho, we're coming, Idaho. Our four-horse team will soon be seen way out in Idaho. We'll want no sieve nor spade, no shovel, pan, nor hoe. The largest chunks lie top of ground, way out in Idaho. Away, Idaho, we're coming, Idaho. Our four-horse team will soon be seen way out in Idaho. And we'll see hard times no more, and want we'll never know. When we have filled our sacks with gold, way out in Idaho. Away, Idaho, we're coming, Idaho. Our four-horse team will soon be seen way out in Idaho. Frank Warner collected that song in 1952 at a conference in Cleveland, Ohio, but the story leading up to that is long and full. So you go do your work.
I have to
I'll
work
take
now. All right.
Friday, June 3rd, 1938. We left New York at 6:50 p.m. and drove over the Pulaski Skyway with a wonderful flaming sunset overhead. Found ourselves in real country in 20 minutes. Through Lambertville, New Jersey, just at dusk, and wished we could stay. A lovely old-fashioned village. So on through the Pennsylvania hills under the moon, onto some extra nice cabins beyond Coatesville. Drake's Spanish Court. They were nice too, even a good bed. That was from my mother, Ann Warner's journal on the first day of Ann and Frank Warner's journey to a world of old songs, old ways, and new friendships, to their unexpected but gladly accepted role as preservers of song of American memory, their journey from the mountains to the sea. Alan Lomax said, "The Warners mined the most pristine American song terrain, the eastern seaboard, where the old songs still retained the flavor of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and where the new American songs grew in the very springtime of the national saga." We have Anne's early young girl diaries of thoughts and poems, and her young woman notebooks of news events and spiritual seeking. And now, she decided to keep a journal as the couple set out to meet Appalachian mountain man Nathan Hicks, who had agreed to make them a lap dulcimer. Saturday, June 4th, 1938. We seemed destined to spend the night in Pulaski, Virginia, which we reached just about 8 p.m. We walked about to see the sights, it being Saturday night, stopped to listen to an exhortation by a young preacher with a fanatical countenance who was holding forth at a tent revival. He didn't seem to be doing so well, for we didn't see anyone come forward, though he came down and argued with individuals in the congregation. Ann Loker was born in St. Louis in 1905 and raised in St. Paul and Chicago. Frank Warner was born into the deep south of Selma, Alabama in 1903 and raised in Durham, North Carolina. In the 30s, because of work and financial necessity, they found themselves in New York City, met and married, but they didn't have kids for a while. Anne had to leave Northwestern University in 1925 after her sophomore year to help support her parents in New York. But she was happy, despite the hardships of the Depression, to find herself a newly married woman in 1938, living in Greenwich Village amidst literary and artistic greats and near greats, in an intellectually stimulating community. From what she told my brother Garrett and me, Frank Warner was not one of the intellectually stimulating near greats, but she grew to love him nonetheless. Sunday, June 5th, 1938. We started out about 7 a.m. on a beautiful morning and got into the mountains almost at once. We crossed the Carolina state line in about 70 miles. Carolina in the morning. We reached Boone toward noon. To our amazement, the town was crowded with people, the streets lined with old cars and trucks and wagons. How the gods smile on us. We had happened on a county sing.
Soon we'll come to the end of life's journey, and perhaps we'll never meet anymore, till we gather in heaven's bright city, far away on that beautiful shore. If we never meet again this side of heaven, as we struggle through this world and its strife, there's another.
We worked our way up to the courthouse. Its front yard and porch were filled with people. By degrees, we got upstairs and into the courtroom where the sing was in process. A mixed group was singing when we came in, about 12, old and young. And when they finished, another group came up, but there was no applause, hardly a change of expression.
I am a poor wayfaring pilgrim,
The next group was a male quartet. The tenor who took the lead sang entirely through his nose, hardly opening his mouth. A young girl in the audience bent down to hide her face and laugh, and came up again without even a smile. I don't think I've ever been stared at as we were in Boone that morning. We must have had an obviously foreign look. Frank Warner grew up in the South as a hunter, a football player, and eventually a YMCA executive. He was also a singer, a talented ukulele player. He was known in college as the big man with a little instrument. He organized an award-winning quartet, led the Duke University Glee Club, and was one of the students asked to sing ballads to illustrate classes given by noted professor and folk song collector Frank C. Brown. It took Frank Warner 6 years to get his degree from Duke, but he used the time wisely, being a campus leader and assistant dean, and advisor to underclassmen. After university, he moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, organizing camps for the YMCA and singing on WBIG in the evening. He sang folk songs, minstrel songs, ballads from the Brown Collection, and popular songs of the day from Paul Whiteman's Rhythm Boys with Bing Crosby. He was a big man with a warm voice and a welcoming spirit. He was equally at home with old country folk or the wealthy members of his Long Island YMCA Board of Directors. I remember being backstage with him before one of his more important concerts, asking, "Aren't you nervous?" He said, "Why should I be nervous? They're only people." Sunday, June 5th, 1938. From Boone, we took a state road to Vilas and Vallecrucis and wound up and up and up for nearly 10 miles. And then the dirt road Nathan Hicks spoke of. It was really nothing but a wagon road, just wide enough for one car. It wound up, straight up sometimes. It took 45 minutes to go 5 miles. When seeking directions once from a mountain local, our parents were told to keep driving up until they went around the bend where they could see their own license plate. Then they'd be there. At last, we could see the Hickses' house down in a little cove, and then we saw Nathan in a shirt and tie, who said he was sure pleased to see us. And we went down into the house, which seemed to be overflowing with people. There, Ann and Frank met the Hicks family. Ethan and Nell, the youngest of their 13 children, and much of the Hickses' extended family and many neighbors, people who had come to see these visitors from the beyond. The hardships were evident, with no running water or electricity or money to buy necessities. The Warners walked into the house to see a couple of cots covered by people sitting on them with a few rickety chairs. Rena Hicks said, "I couldn't hardly believe you'd really come." When the Warners were asked to sit down, Rena said to Ann, "Them chairs ain't very good." Frank Warner said, "I have to be careful when I sit down in any chair." Nathan asked him how much he did weigh. Frank Warner said, "You guess." And Nathan guessed exactly, to everyone's delight. Frank said, "I can see you've been weighing hogs." as my mother told me, the last shreds of restraint vanished. The rest of the day and evening was spent learning about each other and in song. Through friends in that interesting 1938 Greenwich Village community, the Warners met Maurice Madison, who had been collecting ballads and songs on Beech Mountain, North Carolina the year before. He showed the Warners a lap dulcimer made for him by Nathan Hicks. The Warners had never seen one. Few in New York had at the time. The Warners wanted one and wrote to Nathan to see if we would make a dulcimer for them. Nathan wrote back, "Dear Mr. Warner, I received your letter that you wanted a dulcimer like Mr. Madison. I can't send in unless I get some money, as postage and glue and nails cost me money and times is so hard. And my wife is sick most of the time and we have 10 children and the times is so hard I can't get much money. Please send me the money and I'll have a dulcimer ready time I hear from you. Your friend, Nathan Hicks." Fatefully, thankfully, Anne and Frank decided to drive down to Beech Mountain when the dulcimer was ready, instead of waiting for the mail. Or else, instead of 1,000 songs here at the Library of Congress, and scores of historic photographs and years of expressive correspondence from rural friends, we would have a single mountain dulcimer on the wall, which we have anyway.
When sorrow encompassed me around, and added distress, the sea, if few moments of praise I inform, I have hours and they to complain.
The people on Beech Mountain lived in 1938 not very much differently from the Scots-Irish settlers who moved into those North Carolina, Tennessee mountains in the 18th century. And when the Warners drove down to meet their new friends, it was only 20 years after Cecil Sharp and Maud Carpelese had made their momentous journeys into these same Appalachian mountains. There on the beach, the Warners met Buena Vista Hicks, Aunt Buny, who played a fiddle handmade by her husband Roby, back and sides a single piece dug out of a log. Aunt Buny, who sang in that clear, wild mountain style on the edge of her voice, and who started to play at local festivals in the 1960s when she was in her late 70s. They met one of Nathan's sons, Lewis, who, when told that there were 1 million people in New York City, he said, "I reckon if that many folks tuck out after you, they'd sure catch you." And Nathan and Rena's young son, Ray Hicks, who would later be recognized as a master storyteller, and in 1983, given a National Heritage Fellowship by the National Endowment for the Arts. And they met Nathan's young son-in-law, the carpenter and tobacco farmer, Frank Proffitt.
Hold up your hand, oh Joshua, she said, wait a go for to pay my fee, for I have stole a silvery cup, and hangeth I'm a-gonna be. I don't have no money for you, or go for to pay your fee. I've just come for to see you hang on yonder scallops tree. Hold up your hand, oh Joshy, way, she said, wait a while and see. I thought I saw my dear old mother come a-crossing over the sea. Do you have any money for me, or go for to pay my fee? For I have stole a silvery cup, and hangeth I'm a-gonna be. I don't have no money for you, or go for
Frank
to pay
Proffitt
your fee.
was born in 1913. After 6th grade at a mountain school, he left school to work on his father's farm. Then, in the 1930s, left home for the first time to join the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, one of the many programs designed during the Depression by the Roosevelt administration to get America working again. When the Warners met Frank, he'd been away from the beach, some had heard radio, and was under the thrall of Jimmie Rodgers. And why not? But he always valued the older songs he'd learned from his father, Wiley, from his aunt, Nancy Prather, and from his grandfather, John Proffitt, who crossed enemy lines to fight for the Union with the 13th Tennessee Cavalry during the Civil War. Frank Proffitt sang the Warners 3 songs on that first day they met: Dan Dew, Moonshine, and Tom Dooley. Later on in 1941, when the Warners stayed with Frank and his wife Bessie for several days, the Warners had a portable recording machine made for them by Philco Electronics. There at the house that Frank built, the Warners recorded Tom Dooley and the beginnings of a 100-song repertoire from Proffitt's mountain past. Frank Warner was moved by the song Tom Dooley. He took it back to New York, where he sang it for collector Alan Lomax, who included the song in his 1947 book, Folk Song USA. The song and the book made its way around America, and in 1958 was recorded by a West Coast singing group, the Kingston Trio, who sold 3 million copies of the song, and in doing so helped to generate the folk song revival which continues on a half-century later. The story of the Dooley recording is long and for another time, but Lomax's publisher and the Kingston Trio's Capitol Records settled a suit out of court in 1962. And from that settlement, Frank Proffitt made enough to build a new house there in Watauga County.
This is Tom Dooley. Hang down here, Tom Dooley, hang down here and cry. Hang down here, Tom Dooley, poor boy, you bound to die. Met her on the hillside, there you took her life. Met her on the hillside, stabbed her with no knife. Hang down here, Tom Dooley, hang down here and cry. You killed poor Laurie Forster, and now you're bound to die.
Tom Dooley was the story of a real murder that took place in 1868, where Tom Dula, D-U-L-A, pronounced Dooley in the mountains, came back from the Civil War, got himself more than one girlfriend, and then handled it badly. He was hanged for the murder of Laura Foster. Over the years, Frank Proffitt changed the way he sang the song. We don't know if it was the influence of Frank Warner, the Kingston Trio, or just his personal choice.
Hang your head, Tom Dooley, hang your head and cry. Kill little Laurie Foster, now you're bound to die. Met her on the mountain, there you took her life. Met her on the mountain, stopped her with a knife. Hang your take down my banjo, pick it on my knee. For this time tomorrow it'll be no good to me.
Tom Dooley did something else for Frank Proffitt. It allowed him to travel far from his mountaintop and meet thousands of people interested in him and his music. World War II interrupted the Warners' collecting trips. When they finally got a car and the time, they went back to the mountains in 1951, and this time with 2 small children. I stand amazed how they did that, dragging an 8- and a 5-year-old into the 19th century mountain life. When they got to the beach, they found Frank Proffitt was not there. Hard times had caused him to sell his instruments and go off to find work. He had stopped singing. The 1951 sessions, Garrett's and my first in the mountains, yielded much important material because now the Warners had a tape recorder. There were long interviews with Roby and Buny Hicks and a jacktail from Ray and an afternoon with the preacher Lee Monroe Presnell. But Frank Proffitt was missed.
Come on, fathers, and let's go home. I'm a-going where my troubles will be over. Will be over, will be over. I'm a-going where my troubles will be over. There's a little white robe in heaven for me. I'm a-going where my troubles will be over. Will be over, will be over. I'm a-going where my troubles will be over.
The 1950s moved on. The Warners raising 2 sons and holding down their jobs on Long Island in New York, but planted seeds were growing. When Frank Proffitt saw the Kingston Trio sing Tom Dooley on television sometime in the late 50s, he thought they were making fun of him and his music. Frank Warner had to go down to North Carolina to meet with Proffitt and assure him that he was not being mocked. Reluctantly, Proffitt agreed to go with Warner to the 1961 Chicago Folk Festival. Frank Warner said that Proffitt was so nervous he couldn't go on stage. So Warner had the crew turn on all the stage lights so Proffitt couldn't see the audience. And then he went out on stage with Frank Proffitt to ease him into singing. It worked. Reviewer Stud Sterkel said, Frank Proffitt, the farmer and carpenter from North Carolina, told us more than we have grown accustomed to expect, since a great many of us have come to equate folk music with cuteness, cleverness, pretty sounds, but often folk singing is not pretty, and sometimes it is harsh, as life itself is harsh. Always it is true. There was a singular reaction at the 3-day festival. The audience, consisting primarily of college students, acclaimed the Appalachian man rather than the slick prose. In 1964, Proffitt accompanied Warner to the Newport Folk Festival, and then he represented the state of North Carolina at the World's Fair in New York City. Frank Proffitt recorded 3 albums of his music for Folk Legacy and Folkways Smithsonian, and began to get orders for his handmade banjos from around the world. I have one of those banjos made for me by Frank shortly before he died, suddenly, at the age of 52. I'll show it to you sometime. I played another of Frank's banjos in Peter Kennedy's parlor in Gloucester, England in 2004. Frank's music got around. And now I'm glad to say that banjo is in the reading room right here at the Library of Congress, that same one that Frank made for Douglas Kennedy back in '61. At age 16, Frank Proffitt walked barefoot across the hills to his first town, Mountain City, Tennessee. In his short life, Frank moved from 18th century subsistence farming to deserved recognition in the sophistication of the 20th century, playing at festivals, making commercial recordings, taking orders for sought-after handmade banjos, and corresponding with people from around the world. My mother said, Frank Proffitt was a generous, sensitive, uncommonly intelligent, stubborn, and often full of humor man. I love Frank's sense of humor. Speaking of farming his North Carolina mountains, he said he was once plowing a hill so steep that he kept getting dirt down his collar. He met a man once, said Frank, sitting by the side of the road crying. Frank asked him what was the matter. He said, that's the 4th time today I fell out of my cornfield. During that first trip to the mountains in 1938, Frank and the Hickses and the Warners had climbed the hill behind Hicks's house to get a grand look, take pictures, and show everyone binoculars for the first time. Frank Proffitt said he could see his cornfield through the glasses, and then with one of his rare smiles said, I don't see nobody hoeing in it though. Even I can remember Frank's humor. At the Newport Folk Festival in 1964, he saw Earl Scruggs playing banjo, fast. Frank Proffitt said, I'd like to be able to play that way, and then not. In 1959, Frank wrote to the Warners, my earliest recollection is of waking on a cold winter morning in a log cabin on the old Beaver Dam and hearing the sad, haunting tune of Tom Dooley, picked by my father, along with the frying of meat on the little step stove and the noise of the little coffee mill grinding the arbuckle. What better world could they be for a small boy who was hungry for the fried meat and biscuit and hungry also to make sounds like a grown-up on a curly walnut banjo. I started soon to trying to pick the banjo, and soon the happy day came when Dad said, I declare, you air just about got Tom Dooley a-going. I married into another singing family of Nathan Hicks, and with his dulcimer, I went on to the kind of life that I loved. Then Frank Warner came to the mountains, and in him, I saw an educated person who made me feel like somebody. I opened my heart to him and gave him all the old songs of my people. His eyes sparkled as I sang Tom Dooley to him and told him of my grandma, Proffitt, knowing Tom and Laura. I told him of my people, and he and Ann didn't seem to notice that we was poor and didn't know any big words. They bragged on our new calf, on our little 2-room cabin, brought us store stuff to eat. I walked on air for days after they left. I got a television set for the kids, and one night I was a-settin' looking at some foolishness when 3 fellers stepped out with a guitar and a banjo and went to singing Tom Dooley. And they clowned and they hip-swinged. I began to feel sort of sick, like I'd lost a loved one. I went out and I bawled on the ridge, looking toward old Wilkes County, land of Tom Dooley. I looked up across the mountains and I said, Lord, couldn't they leave me the good memories? But then Frank Warner wrote, he tells me that some way our song got picked up. The shock was over. I went back to work. I began to see the world was bigger than our mountains or Wilkes or Watauga. Folks was brothers. I began to pity them that hadn't dozed by the hearthstone. Life was sharing the different thinking, the different ways. I looked in the mirror of my heart. You ain't a boy no longer. Give folks like Frank Warner all you got. Quit thinking ridge to ridge. Think ocean to ocean.
just in a little taste of my rifle ball. Way before it's good daylight, nothing happens to me. I'll be way down yonder in old Tennessee. I'm going across the mountain, oh, fairly well. Going across the mountain, oh, fairly well. I expect you'll miss me when I'm gone, but I'm going through. When this fighting's over, and I'll come back to you. Going across the mountain, oh, fairly well. Going across the mountain, you can hear my banjo bell.
That's a perfect place to take a break. But we couldn't make it that way, so you're going to have to deal with it. Soon we will. A note about the times in which Ann and Frank Warner lived. Mike Seeger said to me once, up until 100 years ago, if you ever heard music, it was played by someone in the same room as you. Then in the 20s came radio, and with a flick of a switch, it ended loneliness. We never thought to ask our parents what it must have been like to live in a time without radio. Then see it become universal. But in the late 1930s, as they were soon to find out, there were pockets of the country where electricity and radios had yet to come. And it was the Depression. Artists and writers were affected by the plight of the common man and had been put to work by the Roosevelt administration. The Federal Writers Project hired more than 6,000 people to write state guidebooks and collect folklore and oral histories. James Agee, in Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, his book-length essay about 3 families of tenant farmers in Alabama, used photographs by the Farm Security Administration's Walker Evans. Virgil Thompson composed scores for government documentaries, and WPA painters created murals celebrating pioneers and working people. Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath grew out of the reporting he did for the FSA on hunger and filth in California migrant camps. In 1939, Aaron Copland wrote film scores for Our Town and the Academy Award-nominated Of Mice and Men, and he was working on his fanfare for the common man. In New York, the Warners' friends were writing about heartland America and portraying country people and their lives. Stephen Vincent Benet wrote Western Star, the Pulitzer Prize-winning book-length poem about the pioneers of America. Carl Karmer, historian, author, and upstairs neighbor, wrote the best-selling Stars Fell on Alabama in 1934, creative nonfiction about the people and folklore of Alabama. 1938. The timing was perfect. 2 people, Anne, a born historian and writer, Frank, a natural singer and engaging Southerner, setting out while the old songs still lingered, encouraged by their literary friends to find America, and setting out when recorded sound away from a studio had become possible. First, the publishers Farrar Reinhardt, then Philco, pioneers in radio and television manufacture, became interested in the Warners' collecting trips. They developed disc makers that could be taken into the field. Those machines and the tape recorder that followed in 1951 made possible the 1,000 songs found by the Warners that now reside at the Library of Congress.
One bright summer's morning, as the fields they were adorning, bright Fabius arose and shone over the lea. I espied a fair maid as a homeward was riding, herding her sheep on the braes of Glenshee. Her cheeks were like roses, and under them was a dimple, and King was Dublin, Carbabani Bluey. She was neat, tall, and handsome,
her voice so enchanting, that my heart soon belonged to the lass of Glenshee.
In the late 1930s, Carl Carmer, their upstairs neighbor, was working on a history of the Hudson River and its lore. In his research, he came across a long-retired Adirondack logger named John Galusha of Minerva, New York. Carl decided the Warners should go visit John, so they did 1 week in the summer of 1939. That began an ongoing relationship with John that lasted until he died in 1950 at the age of 91. He was a reluctant singer at first. Another collector had found John some years before, noted down a raft of songs, and then left without further communication. But John became sure, quickly, that would not be the case with the Warners. John Galusha was of Irish descent, born in 1859. His grandfather fought in the War of 1812. He started working in the North Woods in 1875. The need for wood was enormous in the late 19th century to build and heat houses for the ties of limitless miles of railroad track, and the Adirondacks were, as one commentator put it, the Saudi Arabia of wood. Chopping, hauling, stacking timber all winter, then in the spring driving the logs down the Hudson River to mills at Glens Falls. That's the way John lived.
The shanty man leads a dreariest life, though some think it free from care. It's a wielding an axe from morning until night in the middle of the forest drear. Lying in the shanty bleak and cold, where the stormy winds do blow, and as soon as the morning daylight clears, to the wild wood we must go.
The shanty man is the man that I love best, and I never will deny the same. My heart scorns all you city foppish boys who think it a disgraceful name. You can talk about your farms, but give the shanty man his charms, for he fairly surpasses them all. And until death that do us part, we'll enjoy each other's hearts, though our riches be great or small. John's singing style was decidedly northern and reflective of his Irish heritage and the many Irish Americans who worked in the lumber camps with him. It was not the highly decorated Irish Sean-O style, but an open, declarative Northern Irish storytelling style that delivered both text and emotion. I think of Irish singer Joe Heaney, long living in America, who used to say, "You tell the story and you say the song." And a song should have a pulse, but not a beat.
It was on yon Banshee River, 1 mile below Lencrew, where he went out to break a jam, and with the jam went through. In vain was his activity, his precious life to save. In spite of his exertion, he met a watery grave.
John's older brother died of wounds he received at the Battle of Cold Harbor in Virginia in 1864. The Civil War was most real to him. Frank Warner did not talk much about his own upbringing in the South. John Galusha said, "I knew a rebel colonel. I guided him, fishing. Every time I looked at him, I thought of my brother lying on his bed groaning, and I wanted to kill him. I didn't like him. But he was an all right fellow. The Southern people are a generous race of people if you can believe what you read and what other people tell you."
Come all my jolly seaman, likewise a landsman too. It is a dreadful story I will unfold to you. It's all about the Cumberland, the ship's a true and brave, and it's many's the loyal seaman that met a watery grave. 'Twas early in the morning, just at the break of day, when our good ship, the Cumberland, lie anchored in the bay. When the man from on the lookout down to the rest did say, there is something like a housetop to the larboard sheet as lay.
In vain we poured our broadsides into her ribs of steel, but still no breach was in her and no damage did she feel. Up stepped the rebel captain in a voice of thunder spoke, pull down your Yankee colors or I'll sink your Yankee boat. They swore that they'd not leave her and they manned their guns afresh. And broadside after broadside poured till the waters reached their breast. And as they down went sinking down in the briny deep, the stars and stripes still floated from the mainmast's highest peak.
Only a soldier. I'll tell you of a soldier who lately came from war. He courted a lady with riches laid in store. Her riches were so great that they scarcely could be told, but still she loved her soldier, for he was brave and bold. She said, my honored soldier, I fain would be your wife, but my old Tory father would take away my life. He took his sword and pistols and hung them by his side, and vowed that he would marry her whatever might betide.
Through Carl Carmer, the Warners also met a singer in New Hampshire, my adopted state. Her name was Helena Lena, born Fish, Grammy Fish. She was born in 1873 into a logging family in the Black Brook section of northern Adirondacks, moving to New Hampshire in her early 20s to take a job as a housekeeper for a midwife. Then she married her employer's son, John Fish, and raised a large family in the Temple Jaffrey section of the state. When the Warners first knocked on her door in the summer of 1940 saying, we've heard you were interested in old-time songs, she said, come right in. My folks said she chased the grandkids out of the house, took the phone off the hook, and was soon singing and was not to be stopped. Her offspring cared little for her homely old songs and sentimental poems. She was so happy to have someone visit her who cared. In 2 long weekends in 1940 and 41, she sang almost 100 songs to the Warners, out of memory, without reading music. Helen Hartness Flanders, a Vermont collector in the 40s, also visited Mrs. Fish. She, too, got 100 songs from Fish, of which 50 are different. I visit Lena's granddaughter, Ruth Quinn, whenever I'm out in Temple, New Hampshire. Matter of fact, 2 years ago, I got to go to her 90th birthday party. She said the Warners and Flanders visits did wonders for her grandmother. She took a new interest in life, collected more stories about local history, and started distributing a little mimeograph newsletter about her songs, collected and even a few written by Lena. She even began to sing out for local societies and civic organizations. There are many members of the extended Fish family in southern New Hampshire. Every 5 years or so, they have a big gathering, a fish fry. A few years ago, I got voted on as an honorary Fish, and I went to the fry and got to sing some of Lena's songs to her great-great-grandkids. She would have been pleased. Anne and Frank Warner entered into the field of folk song collecting as enthusiastic, untutored amateurs. They both had full-time jobs and were lucky to have a few weeks each summer to be out looking for songs. They had none of the training, grants, or university support that was to come later to some folklorists. Anne and Frank always wished they'd asked Grammy Fish where she learned her songs, but they didn't know enough to ask at the time. The Warners developed their own style of collecting. Befriend, share stories, offer a list of motifs that are in old songs designed to spur memory, like Milk-White Steeds, Castle Gates, 3 Times Round, Wee Pen Knives. If that didn't work, just keep singing songs at them until they couldn't take it anymore and they'd sing back. Then record a verse and chorus while Anne took down the balance of words in shorthand. That worked for them until they started lecturing and writing about these remarkable singers and their songs. Then they wished they had learned more about provenance from these fine tradition bearers.
The castle by the sea, arise, oh arise, my lady fair, for you my bride shall be, and we will dwell in a sylvan bower in my castle by the sea, and bring along your marriage fee, which you can claim today, and also take your swiftest steeds, the milk-white and the gray. The lady mounted her white steed, he rode the turban gray. They took the path of a wild seashore, or so I've heard them say.
Grammy's repertoire was far-ranging, including child ballads like Lord Bateman and Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight, which you just heard, and songs like The Bonnie Bay of Biscay-O, found elsewhere in America, but we don't think so, and even in the UK I can't find any record of that song. Here's what Mrs. Fish sang. Of all the harbors, east or west, there is one port that I love best. Whichever way the wind doth blow, I'll steer for the bonny Bay of Biscay-O. The girl I love is a-waiting there, with her eyes of blue and her golden hair. It's eastward high and westward ho, but a return to the bonny Bay of Biscay-O. In one more year I will settle down with my bride in this free seaport town. Sweeter and dearer by far I know than the winds of the bonny Bay of Biscay-O. The girl I love is a-waiting there, with her eyes of blue and her golden hair. It's eastward high and westward ho, but a return to the bonny Bay of Biscay-O. You want to try it? All right. For the girl I love is a-waiting there, with her eyes of blue and her golden hair. It's eastward high and westward ho, but a return to the bonny Bay of Biscay-O. The girl I love is a-waiting there, with her eyes of blue and her golden hair. It's eastward high and westward ho, but a return to the bonny Bay of Biscay-O. Her repertoire included songs from American history and from the 19th century stage, like All the Little Chickens in the Garden and The Jolly Roving Tar.
The Jolly Roving Tar. Ships may come and ships may go, as long as the sea doth roll. Each sailor loves just like his daddy loves the flowing bowl. A trip ashore he does adore, with a girl that's plump and round. When his mom is gone, it's the same old song, get up Jack John, sit down. Come along, you jolly brave boys, there's lots of grog in the jar. Let's plow the briny ocean with my jolly roving tar.
He then will sail. When Jack gets in, it's then he'll steer for some old boarding house. They'll welcome him with the rum and gin. They'll feed him on pork souse. He'll lend and spend and not offend till he lies drunk on the ground. When your money's gone, it's the same old song. Get up, Jack John, sit down, hit it. Come along, you jolly brave boys. There's lots of grog in the jar. We'll plow the briny ocean with the jolly roving tar. When Jack gets old and weather beat, too old to roam about, in some rum shop they'll let him stop till 8 bells calls him out. He'll raise his eyes up to the sky, saying, boys, we're homeward bound. When your money's gone, it's the same old song. Get up, Jack John, sit down. Come along, you jolly brave boys. There's lots of grog in the jar. We'll plow the briny ocean with the jolly roving tar. And Lena's repertoire included a lot of funny songs from the humor of the late 19th century.
The tune the cow died on. Farmer John from his work came home one summer afternoon and sat beneath the maple tree to sing himself a tune. He sang till the cows came running up and around him formed a ring. For never before had Farmer John attempted for to sing. High fall the rado, so sang Farmer John. High fall the rado is the tune the cow died on.
Now the oldest cow the farmer had tried to join the song, but she could not strike the melody, though her voice were loud and strong. The farmer laughed till the tears rolled down his cheeks like apples are red. The cow got mad, she could not sing, and so she fell down dead. High fall the rado, so sang Farmer John. High fall the rado, it's the tune the cow died on. So the farmer had an inquest held to see what ailed the cow. The jury sat, the verdict gave, I mean to tell you now. They said that the cow would be living yet and chewing their cud with glee if Farmer John hadn't sung that song beneath the apple tree. High fall the rado, so sang Farmer John. High fall the rado, it's the tune the cow died on. That may be the only time in your life you ever hear that song. Well, let me guarantee that the second half is a lot shorter than the first. That's the way we had to make it work. We could tell you why, but it would be even more boring if we told you why. So we're going to have, we've got another little section here, just a paragraph by Lena in her own writing. Then we're going to take a break. I've got my extended family for generations out there handling the sales table. What you've got, Tim Erickson in 1998 decided that we should publish this Warner collection. And so he arranged with Appleseed Record, his publisher at the time, to produce 2 albums. So Garrett, my brother Garrett, and I listened for a whole year to the collection and pulled out 2 albums of these singers singing these historic songs. And those are there. Also a mailing list for me, because I'm around all the time singing these old songs. If you're interested, we'll be out there talking too. We have a book of songs Lena put together, mimeographed. The introduction, written in her own hand, says, "With what tender memories my heart was filled as I wrote down these old songs. As you review the songs of long ago, I think you will find they will compare favorably in both rhythm and rhyme to modern song and verse. May they fill many hearts with tender memories of childhood, is the sincere wish of Lena Born Fish."
I'm knocking at my window. I pray you tell to me, it's me, your old true love, and we for all
so soft sleeping, and your true love going away. Go, love, go, and ask your papa if this night you could be my boy. If he says no, so return and tell me, be my least time ever bother thee. I can't
In 1951, Garrett's and my first trip to Beech Mountain, the trip where Frank Proffitt has sold his instruments and had gone off to find work, that trip, the Warners met Lee Monroe Presnell, Buny Hicks's uncle. Born in 1876, he was the grandson of Council Harmon, legendary Watauga County singer and storyteller. Lee Monroe became a preacher. "Finest preacher you ever heard," said Buny. The interview you'll hear shortly was recorded in 1951, Frank Warner and Lee Monroe Presnell.
Be my least time ever bother thee. I can't go and ask my mama and tell her of your love so dear. Or if you may go and court some other and whisper soft like in her ear.
Good morning, Mr. Presnell.
Morning.
How are you, sir?
Coming?
Coming?
Yes, sir.
Everything's a nice day after the big rain.
Fine, yes, sir.
Settle things down.
Yes, sir. Fine.
How about telling me about you? I'm interested in knowing about you and your folks.
I was 75 the 15th of last May.
Hmm.
I've tried to represent the old Primitive Baptist for about 42 years.
Is that so?
Yes, sir. And I'm getting feeble, I'm getting old, but at the same time I've got a hope.
Amen?
Yes, sir.
Amen.
I've got a good hope.
Yes, sir.
And I stay on the spurs of the Beech Mountain where the air is fresh and healthy. And the water's cool. And I'm glad that the good Lord has blessed me and kept me till this present time. And for that purpose, I don't know why I'm here, but for some purpose.
It's a good reason.
Yes, sir. It's a good reason. There was two sisters that loved one man, Jenny Flower Jam, and Rosemary, and the youngest of them he loved best, and the jury hangs hope of the Rosemary. Oh, sister, sister, walk with me.
Jenny Flower, Jenna, Rosemary.
Walk with me to the nearest pond.
And the jury hangs over the rosemary.
Oh, the oldest pushed the youngest in.
Jenny Flower, Jenna, Rosemary.
Had us all passing at the water was clear.
And the jury hangs over the rosemary.
Oh, sister, sister, reach me your hand.
Jenny Flower, Jenna, Rosemary.
You may have head off that land.
And the jury hangs over the rosemary.
Oh, sister, sister, I won't reach my hand.
Jenny Flower, Jenna, Rosemary.
I will never all off that land.
And the jury hangs over the rosemary.
Mr. One, I'm going to sing you a good old spiritual now. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how heavy my load. Nobody knows how thorny my road. Nobody cares if I'm trouble on the way. How dark the night, how dark the day. Nobody knows, nobody cares. My heavy burden nobody shares. My only comfort and my only stay. Jesus is walking by my side all the way. Nobody knows how hard I must.
Through Frank, though Frank Warner grew up in the segregated South, he had friends in the black community from his earliest days. As a young man, he had met a woman who was a cook at a fisherman's boarding house in Nag's Head on the Outer Banks. She was Sue Thomas of Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Anne and Frank visited with her, sang with her before they were married and before they knew they were interested in song gathering. Once they knew, they went back to see her. Sue Thomas had many fine gospel songs, including He's Got the Whole World in His Hand, which Sue and then Frank Warner were singing long before Marian Anderson or Lonnie Donegan recorded it, long before it was sung around every campfire in America. She also sang a song Frank Warner used to close his programs, Hold My Hand, Lord Jesus.
Mr. Frank, I'm going to sing your favorite song, Hold My Hand, Lord Jesus. Hold my hand, Lord Jesus, hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord Jesus, hold my hand. There's a race that we must run, and a victory to be won. Every hour, give me power to go through.
I'll go through, Lord Jesus, I'll go through. I'll go through, Lord Jesus, I'll go through. There's a race that we must run, and a victory to be won. Every hour, give me power to go through. I'm your child, Lord Jesus, I'm your child. Pretty simple. I'm your child, Lord Jesus, I'm your child. Race that we must run. There's a race that we must run, and a victory to be won. Every hour, give me power. Every hour, give me power to go through. Hold my hand, Lord Jesus. Hold my hand, Lord Jesus, hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord Jesus, hold. Race that we must run. There's a race that we must run, and a victory to be won. Every hour, give me power to go through. One of the trips down to see Sue Thomas, Anne and Frank stopped overnight in Suffolk, Virginia, which is, unsurprisingly, just south of Norfolk, Virginia. At supper at the Elliott Cafe, they were waited on by an affable young man, Bill Moss, with whom they quickly got into conversation. They asked if he knew anyone in town who knew the old songs. He called his friend Jesse McDonald over, and Jesse said, "There's Uncle Joe. He knows all them old songs." Bill objected, "But you know Uncle Joe is dead." "No," Jesse said, "he mighty low, but he ain't dead." The next morning, Bill and Jesse took the Warners to see Uncle Joe. He was mighty low. He had had a stroke and was confined to bed. He struggled to sing. His songs, though heartfelt, are hard to understand.
Where I must go. This is the part in the rest in me slow. I'll go on fighting, mercy so free, and nothing seems better to me. And nothing seems better to me. And nothing seems better to me. And I'm fighting for free liberty. And nothing seems better to me. Oh, there's nothing.
Uncle Joe had, for 50 years, been a successful street vendor in Suffolk, Virginia, selling peanuts in a town where peanuts was the industry. More importantly, to him and probably his customers, he was also a lay preacher. When he had enough people gathered around his cart eating peanuts, he'd sing his gospel songs and preach. He was a loved character in Suffolk. He taught Frank Warner the street cry he used to get folks to come to his cart. And my father taught it to me. He said, "Fresh peanuts! Fresh peanuts is the best of all. These raised in the summer and dug in the fall. I got fresh peanuts. 1 bag for nickel, 1 bag for nickel, and 2 for a dime. 3.15 and all of them mine. If you don't think they're good, just buy them and try them. I got fresh peanuts. Raised by the hand, parched in the pan. I got a sell of one if I can. Please don't deny them. Just step up and buy them. I got fresh peanuts. Joe Henry Johnson is my name. Selling peanuts is my game. I got fresh peanuts. 1 bag for nickel, 1 bag for nickel, and 2 for a dime. 3.15 and all of them mine. If you don't think they're good, just buy them and try them. I got fresh peanuts. Raised by the hand, parched in the pan. I got a sell of one if I can. Please don't deny them. Just step up and buy them. I got fresh peanuts."
This ballad is about Paul Jones. A 40-gun frigate from Baltimore came, her guns mounted 40, the Richard by name, went cruising the channel of old England land. With a noble commander, Paul Jones was a man hero. Our country forever hero. At the hour of 12 fierce he came alongside, with a loud speaking trumpet, "Whence came you?" I cried. "Quick, give me an answer, I've hailed you before, or this very instant a broadside of roll. Our country forever roll."
Not too far south of Suffolk, Virginia, is Roanoke Island and the small village of Wanchese on the outer banks of North Carolina. Frank Warner knew that Frank C. Brown of Duke University had collected songs in the 20s from a fisherman named Charles Tillet. So the Warners went to find Mr. Tillet. They met him and his wife, Eleazar, great Bible name, in the summer of 1940, just as they had got their first Wilcox Gay recording machine. They only had 2 hours with Charles, known as Tink Tillet, but they were great ones, yielding songs about Paul Jones, which you just heard, and Napoleon Bonaparte, child ballads, and even a 1917 Harry Lauder music hall song, "There's Somebody Waiting for Me." We'll sing that together sometime.
Somebody Waiting for Me is the name.
The Warners and the Tillets expected a happy reunion the following summer, but Tink died suddenly in the spring of '41. His wife, Eleazar, wrote inviting the Warners down, saying she would do the best she could to remember Tink's songs, which she did very well. The Warners went down in 1941, and many times thereafter, beginning a relationship with the Tillet family that continues to this day, and allowed me to meet Eleazar and to know her children and grandchildren. Eleazar, born around 1870, is one of my favorite singers.
It's been a year since last we met. We may never meet again. I have struggled to forget, but the struggle was in vain. For her voice lives on the breeze, and her spirit comes at will. In the midnight on the seas, her bright smile haunts me still. In the midnight on the seas, her bright smile haunts me still.
I have sailed 'neath alien skies. I have chartered hazards past. I have seen the storms arise like a giant in his wrath. Every danger I have known that a reckless life can fill, though her presence is now flown. Her bright smile haunts me still, though her presence is now flown. Her bright smile haunts me still. At the first sweet dawn of light, when I gaze upon the deep, her form still fills my sight, while the stars their vigil keep. When I close my aching eyes, sweet dreams my memory fill, and from sleep when I arise, her bright smile haunts me still. And from sleep when I arise, her bright smile haunts me still. In 1951, the Warners had a tape recorder. At the end of the session, maybe Garrett and I were in the room, Eleazar and Frank Warner and Ann agreed to resume their visits.
Let's make a date now for next summer, all right? Oh, yes, you will.
We'll expect to see you.
Let's make it.
I'll be so deaf and dumb.
Oh, no, you won't.
I'll be so blind and so deaf. I tell you, we're getting there.
Let's make a date with the sisters next summer and sit down and remember the rest of them, won't you?
If we're living.
All right.
If I'm living.
One of Eleazar's songs was Nancy Till, or Come Love Come, a charming meld of two 19th century minstrel songs.
If you could just sing us that much you sang, we'd love it.
Down in the canebrake close by a mill lived a pretty yaller gal, her name was Nancy Till. I knew that she loved me, I knew it was wrong. Now I'm going to serenade her and sing her a song. Come, love, come, the boat lies low. She lies high and dry on the Ohio. Come, love, come, won't you go along with me? I'll take you down to Tennessee. Never saw a pretty girl in all my life. What she was, some boatswain's wife. Boatsmen dance and the boatsmen sing. Boatsmen do most anything.
Come, love, come, the boat rides low, rides high and dry on the Ohio. Come, love, come, go with me. we'll go down to Tennessee. Boatmen dance and the boatmen sing and the boatmen do most anything. When the boatman come on shore, spend his cash and he'll work for more. Come, love, come, the boat rides low, rides high and dry on the Ohio. Come, love, come, go with me, we'll go down to Tennessee. When you go to the boatman's ball, you dance with my wife or you won't dance at all. Sky blue jacket and the tarpaulin hat, look out boys for the nine-tailed cat. Come, love, come, the boat rides low, rides high and dry on the Ohio. Come, love, come, go with me, we'll go down to Tennessee. I've come this way and I'll come no more. Let me by and I'll go on shore. There I'll turn my passion loose, cram me in the calaboose. Come, love, come, the boat rides low, rides high and dry on the Ohio. Come, love, come, come with me, we'll go down by the canebrake, close by the mill, lived a pretty little girl, the name her Nancy Till. I knew that she loved me and I knew it was wrong. Now I serenade her and sing her a song. Come, love, come, the boat rides low, rides high and dry on the Ohio. Come, love, come, go with me, we'll go down to Tennessee. There were other places, other singers, other important songs found in living rooms or in hotel dining rooms, from interested professors or Jamaican women who looked after Garrett and me in New York City when we were babies, or songs from barefoot country children. But we journey together where we began it on Beech Mountain, North Carolina. I'll take a second here to thank a bunch of people, and we can hold applause until we get through because there's so many to recognize. My brother Garrett, who put together the visual thing here, it's just beautiful from all the Frank and Ann Warner photographs, and my sister-in-law Mimi Greddy, who's been running the sound tonight for the sound of the recordings. Chris Romaine, the inevitable and wonderful Chris Romaine, who loaned me his banjo so I didn't have to fly with one. Folklore Society of Greater Washington, who co-sponsored tonight. Thank you. Todd Harvey of the American Folklife Center, who made so easy the donation of this banjo once we decided to do it. And who I'll talk to if we want it back. Steve Winnick, writer, editor for the Folklore Center, for arranging and moderating the interview we did this afternoon and helping with the organizing of this event. And Thea Austin, who was our point person and worked with me for months to get us here. She's the Public Events Folklife Center coordinator. And she and I have worked together before. In 1993, I was singing in England, and Bob Copper of the famous Singing Copper family said to me, "You're going to fix our first tour in America." And I said, okay, and I did. So in 1995, the Copper family, in their first trip over, stood on this very stage in this very room and sang the songs from their generations of Sussex farmer background. It was so funny that first day they came on stage here, they looked out at the audience, and Bob Copper said, "Where's the beer?" We end this, in 1959, the first mountain trip Garrett and I, applause. '59, the first mountain trip Garrett and I really remember, we met Homer Cornett, a cousin of Frank Proffitt. He was a shy man who sang only 2 songs in the one visit we had with him. One was an older gospel song he had reworked as a gift to the church when he joined. It's called The Wild Stormy Deep. Let's listen to Homer sing, and then let's end together by singing it together.
On the wild stormy deep, with Jesus I'll sleep, and hold to his loving hand, and home above I'll be there with God, and rejoice in happy land. My soul was sad, my heart was sore, out on this lifeboat sea, and spoke to God in humble way, and there he appeared to me.
On the wild stormy deep, with Jesus I'll sleep, and hold to his loving hand. In a home above, I'll be there with God, and rejoice in a happy land. I kneeled myself to his tender call, and he washed my sins away. He prepared a home up there for me, and there I'll forever stay. On the wild stormy deep, with Jesus I'll sleep, and hold to his loving hand. In a home above, I'll be there with God, and rejoice in a happy land. There's a song of my soul, says, Lord, make me whole. May happiness there ever be. May I live a clean life in this sinful old world. Oh, the Lord has set me free. On the wild stormy deep, with Jesus I'll sleep, and hold to his loving hand. In a home above, I'll be there with God, and rejoice in a happy land. Do it again. On the wild stormy deep, with Jesus I'll sleep, and hold to his loving hand. In a home above, I'll be there with God, and rejoice in a happy land. Thank you.
Please, another round of applause for Jeff Warner, for Garrett Warner, and for the whole team. Thank you all so much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.